I always thought of myself as a night owl, which is probably why this job felt like a good fit when I first took it. Working as a night shift security guard in a corporate building sounded easy. Boring, sure, but nothing I couldn't handle. The building, all glass and steel, loomed over an empty parking lot as I arrived. It wasn't particularly old or eerie, just sterile. The shifts were predictable. At 10 p.m., I'd check in, grab the flashlight, and settle into the monitoring room on the first floor. From there, I'd spend hours staring at black and white feeds from the security cameras, doing rounds when the boredom became unbearable. That night was no different. I poured myself a cup of the bitter, lukewarm coffee the afternoon shift had left behind and took a seat at the desk. The cameras blinked to life. Long, empty hallways, dimly lit offices, and the occasional flicker of a fluorescent light. A hum of electricity filled the silence. Around midnight, the first oddity appeared. One of the monitors flickered, showing static for a split second before returning to normal. It was camera 5, covering a corridor on the 10th floor. Probably just a glitch, I muttered to myself. Still, it was protocol to log these incidents, so I jotted it down in the shift report. 15 minutes passed without anything else happening, and I was about to chalk it up to faulty wiring when it happened again. This time, the flicker lasted longer, just enough for me to glimpse something odd. The corridor door, which was always closed, seemed slightly ajar. My stomach tightened. It was probably nothing, but the job came with certain responsibilities. I grabbed the flashlight, strapped on the walkie-talkie, and headed for the elevator. The building was silent as I ascended, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you feel exposed. When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped out into the 10th floor. The hallway stretched out before me, its dim lights casting shadows that seemed to shift as I moved. I checked the door. It was shut, locked, just as it should be. Glitch, I whispered, more to reassure myself than anything else. But as I turned to leave, I thought I heard something, just a faint creak, like the weight of a foot on a loose floorboard. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the shadows. Nothing. Shrugging off the unease, I headed back to the monitoring room, determined to finish the shift without letting my imagination get the better of me. Back in the monitoring room, I settled into my chair, still gripping the flashlight as if it were some kind of talisman. The flickering on camera 5 hadn't returned, but my nerves were on edge. I kept replaying the sound I'd heard. Was it really just my imagination? I scanned the other monitors, trying to shake the unease. For the next hour, nothing unusual happened. The building seemed as lifeless as it always was during my shifts. The coffee cup in front of me had gone cold, but I didn't feel like getting up to brew another pot. Just as I started to relax, something caught my attention on camera 7, which covered a stairwell between the 9th and 10th floors. The grainy feed showed a faint movement, a blur, like someone had just darted out of frame. I leaned forward, staring at the monitor, heart pounding in my chest. Is someone here? I muttered under my breath. It wasn't impossible. Sometimes people from the cleaning crew came in late to finish their rounds, though they were supposed to notify me first. Grabbing the walkie-talkie, I called out, "This is security. If anyone's in the building, you need to identify yourself." Static crackled in response. No reply. With a deep breath, I forced myself to get up. It was probably nothing, a shadow, a glitch in the feed, but I couldn't ignore it. Not after the incident with camera 5 earlier. I took the elevator up to the 9th floor, my flashlight's beam bouncing against the walls as I stepped into the hallway. The stairwell door was slightly ajar. My pulse quickened. I nudged it open with the toe of my shoe, the hinges letting out a low groan that echoed up the stairs. "Hello," I called, shining the light up the staircase. The beam hit nothing but concrete walls and steel railings. I took a few tentative steps up, the sound of my boots ricocheting in the confined space. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from above. I froze, holding my breath as I listened. They weren't loud, but the sound was unmistakable. Someone was there. "Hey, this is private property." My voice came out sharper than I intended, more out of fear than authority. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the silence was deafening. My flashlight beam trembled slightly as I aimed it up the stairs. There was no one there. I backed out of the stairwell, shutting the door firmly behind me. My heart was racing as I took the elevator back to the monitoring room. As I sat down, I glanced at the monitors again, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of acoustics or an overactive imagination. But when I looked at camera 7, my blood ran cold. The door to the stairwell I'd just closed was now wide open. I stared at the monitor, my breath caught in my chest. The stairwell door wasn't just ajar. It was wide open, swinging faintly as if someone had just walked through it. The rational part of my brain screamed for an explanation, a faulty hinge, a draft. But deep down, I knew the truth. I turned up the volume on the feed. The faint hiss of static filled the room, but underneath it, I thought I heard something else, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps echoing in the stairwell. The walkie-talkie crackled on my desk, startling me. A burst of static, then silence. "Who's there?" I demanded, snatching it up. My voice was steadier than I felt. No answer, just the empty hum of the building, punctuated by the occasional flicker of the screens in front of me. My eyes darted between the monitors, searching for movement, but everything else was still. Then camera 5 flickered again. The image cleared just long enough to show something, or someone, standing at the far end of the 10th floor hallway. It was too far to make out any details, just a shadowy figure partially obscured by darkness. My pulse pounded in my ears as I watched the figure remain motionless for a moment, then step out of view. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the monitoring room, lock the door, and call for backup. But who would I even call? The cops. And what would I say? That a shadow on a grainy camera feed was freaking me out? Against my better judgment, I grabbed the flashlight again and made my way to the elevator. My legs felt heavy, every step a deliberate effort to move forward. The 10th floor greeted me with silence. The air felt heavier here, the kind of oppressive stillness that made it hard to breathe. I shined the flashlight down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. At first, there was nothing, no movement, no signs of anyone. But as I approached the end of the corridor, I saw it, the door that had been ajar on the monitor. It was now shut tight. I reached out and tested the handle. Locked. My flashlight beam swept over the surface of the door, revealing faint smudges, like fingerprints pressed against the glass. A sudden noise behind me made me spin around. It was faint, like a whisper just out of earshot. I aimed the flashlight wildly, its beam bouncing off the walls, but the hallway was empty. The whisper came again, clearer this time. It wasn't words, just the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, and too close. I ran. Back in the elevator, I stabbed the button for the ground floor, my heart hammering in my chest. As the doors slid shut, I caught one last glimpse of the hallway. And there it was, standing at the end of the corridor, a dark figure, its features blurred, but unmistakably watching me. The elevator doors closed, and I was plunged into the safety of its cramped, fluorescent-lit interior. Or so I thought. The elevator felt like a sanctuary, small, enclosed, and brightly lit. I gripped the flashlight in one hand and the walkie-talkie in the other, my knuckles white. The ride down seemed agonizingly slow, each floor ticking by with a faint mechanical hum. As the elevator reached the ground floor, I braced myself. The doors slid open, revealing the empty lobby. I exhaled, stepping out cautiously. Back in the monitoring room, I locked the door behind me and slumped into the chair, trying to steady my breathing. My hands shook as I stared at the monitors. Everything seemed quiet now. The stairwell door was closed again, and the 10th floor was empty. I wanted to believe it was over, that whatever I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, was gone. But deep down, I knew better. The quiet was broken by a faint, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't coming from the monitors this time. It was here, in the room with me. I froze. The sound grew louder, more deliberate, like footsteps crossing a tiled floor. The walkie-talkie crackled in my hand, and a voice whispered through the static. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but then it became clear. "Why did you leave?" My blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't human. It was distorted, hollow, as if it came from a place far away. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the corners of the room. Nothing. Just the hum of the monitors and the faint flicker of the fluorescent light overhead. Then I saw it. On the monitor showing the camera feed from the lobby, a figure stood in the center of the room. It was the same shadowy presence I'd seen on the 10th floor, featureless, but undeniably there. And it was facing the monitoring room. My breath hitched as I realized what it meant. It wasn't just on the cameras anymore. It was here. I gripped the walkie-talkie tighter, fumbling to switch channels, hoping to call for help, but the static only grew louder. The figure on the monitor began to move, heading toward the door. My flashlight beam darted to the door, and for a moment, I thought I saw the handle twitch. "No, no, no," I muttered, backing away. The tapping sound came again, louder now, closer. It wasn't just in the monitor feed. It was outside the door. I backed against the desk, heart hammering, as the sound stopped abruptly. Silence. Then, slowly, the door began to creak open. The door creaked open just a few inches, its movement agonizingly slow. My flashlight trembled as I pointed it toward the widening gap. For a moment, there was nothing, just the empty corridor beyond. Then, the shadow appeared. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. Not a person, not exactly. Its form seemed to shift, dark and indistinct, as if it were made of smoke, but bound to a humanoid shape. It stood just outside the doorway, motionless, as though waiting for an invitation to enter. My body was frozen, every muscle locked in place as I stared at the figure. The room felt colder, the air heavier, and I could hear my own ragged breathing over the oppressive silence. Finally, the figure stepped forward. Its movements were unnatural, like a series of still frames played back in slow motion. It didn't walk. It glided, yet the sound of heavy footsteps echoed with each motion. I couldn't move. My body refused to obey as the figure came closer. But then, just as it reached the edge of the desk, it stopped. "Why are you still here?" The voice wasn't a whisper this time. It filled the room, reverberating in a way that made my teeth ache. I found my voice, though it was barely more than a hoarse whisper. What do you want?" The figure tilted its head, as if considering the question. "This is my place," it said, "and you shouldn't have come." The words hit me like a physical blow, but something about them stirred a faint memory. I'd heard rumors about this building before, stories the day shift guards told, dismissing them as urban legends. Years ago, a security guard had died here under mysterious circumstances. My mind raced. Could this be him? "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice steadier this time. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it moved closer, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. When it finally spoke, the words were slow and deliberate. "I stayed too long," it said, "and so will you." The lights in the room flickered violently, and the monitors burst into static. The figure lunged forward, and instinct took over. I bolted, shoving past the door and sprinting down the hallway. The building seemed endless as I ran, every corner stretching farther than it should. I could hear the footsteps behind me now, heavy, relentless, growing louder with each passing second. Finally, I reached the main entrance. My hands fumbled with the lock, and for one terrifying moment, I thought it wouldn't budge. But then, with a deafening click, the door swung open, and I stumbled into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. When I looked back at the building, the shadow was gone, or so I thought. The night air was frigid, biting at my skin as I crouched on the pavement, my chest heaving with each desperate breath. For a brief, blissful moment, I thought I'd escaped. But as I turned my gaze back to the building, the unease crept in again. The windows of the lobby glowed faintly, their reflections distorted by the streetlights. My eyes searched for movement, expecting to see the shadow lingering inside. There was nothing. The building was still, silent, but I wasn't alone. A sensation prickled the back of my neck, the undeniable feeling of being watched. Slowly, I turned, the hairs on my arms standing on end. Across the empty parking lot, at the edge of the dim security lights, stood the figure. It was no longer a vague shadow. It had taken on a more defined shape, a silhouette of a man in a dark uniform, much like mine. My heart sank as the realization hit me. "You stayed too long," it had said. The stories about the previous guard weren't just rumors. Whoever, or whatever, it was him, or what was left of him. I staggered to my feet, backing away toward my car. My keys trembled in my hand as I fumbled to unlock the door. The figure didn't move, but the weight of its gaze felt unbearable. I managed to get the door open and threw myself inside. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt. As the building shrank in my rearview mirror, I tried to convince myself it was over. But deep down, I knew better. I didn't sleep that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, standing at the end of the hallway, watching me. By the next evening, I'd resolved to quit. Whatever this was, I couldn't face it again. But when I called the security company to resign, they told me something that sent a chill down my spine. "We don't have any reports of an issue last night," the supervisor said. "In fact, the building manager said you didn't log out. Are you sure you left the site?" My stomach turned. "I logged out," I stammered. "I left the building." There was a pause. "That's strange," he said finally, "because according to the cameras, you're still there." My breath caught in my throat. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated. "We're watching the live feed right now. You're sitting in the monitoring room." The call disconnected before I could respond, my phone slipping from my hands. My blood turned to ice as a terrible thought crept into my mind. I turned to the mirror across the room, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't casting a reflection.